All right, everyone. Welcome into Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. It's a Wednesday night. That means we've got a live stream up and running with the best live chat room in college football. Please join us at 860-325-3687. That's 860-325-3687. I will get the number in the chat in just a minute. Want to let you know that we've got two guests lined up, and who knows, maybe more. 7:30, Savannah Lee Richardson to talk Georgia, Alabama SEC championship game. Savannah joins us from Bulldog Illustrated. Then at 8 o'clock Eastern time, we got Shane Roberts jumping on from the Block U to talk Utah, Washington in the Pac-12 championship game. Later tonight, don't believe I'm going live with these conversations, but going to record them for previews to be released here in the next day or two with Ryan Cantor from Shaking the Southland, the Clemson platform on SB Nation, to talk Tigers and Pitt Panthers for the ACC. And then the Washington side of the Pac-12 equation with Chris Fetters from Dogman 247 Sports joining us to talk Washington football as the Huskies take on the Utah Utes. Plenty of Ohio State and Alabama talk headed your way tomorrow as we're joined by Stephen M. Smith of Touchdown Alabama to talk the Tide against the Georgia Bulldogs in the SEC championship game. And Steve Hellwagon from 247 Sports Bucknuts will be with us tomorrow as well to talk the Buckeyes and Northwestern. Earlier this week, we were joined by SB Nation to talk Northwestern football. Hope you were able to join that video. Please check it out as we scour the Wildcats and pretty much break down Northwestern football top to bottom as the Wildcats, a 14-point underdog, take on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Also, I had a conversation with Jim Hammett. He's from Rivals to talk Pitt Panthers football with the ACC championship game coming up on Saturday as well. So check out those videos as well as my top 25 that actually makes sense. And of course, my college football playoff predictions. That would be my college football playoff predictions. Not the predictions themselves, but I was predicting the rankings that the committee would select, which were released Tuesday night. I don't like to do that, but people like that for some reason. They like people to predict what other people are selecting. So I did that. I've been asked to do that a few times. So I've pulled through on that guarantee. So I posted a video predicting what the College Football Playoff Selection Committee ranked the teams last night and released. And I was way off on somebody there. They kept Texas back at 14. I elevated Texas to number 10. And that was my big disparity between myself and the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, or not necessarily my difference with the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, but my difference between what I predicted that the selection committee would select versus what they did select. All right, let's check out the chat room. Unfortunately, we don't have Claire Crawford tonight. She had to cancel last second. We had Claire lined up for the Buckeyes and the Wildcats, Ohio State and Northwestern in the Big Ten championship game coming up Saturday night. We will be joined at 7:30 by Savannah Lee Richardson from Bulldog Illustrated. Then at 8 o'clock Eastern time, Shane Roberts from the Block U. Let's check out this chat room. We do have some news around college football from both earlier today and earlier this week, as Mack Brown is stepping from the TV set to the North Carolina football sidelines, taking over North Carolina football for the second go-around for Mack Brown. Of course, he was there in the 90s. Then he went to Texas, won a national championship with Vince Young in 2005. Stayed with the Longhorns through, I believe it was 2010 or 2011. And now he's back on the coaching carousel, or maybe a last stop for Mack Brown, most likely. But much like a Herm Edwards and a Howard Schnellenberger from several years ago, a guy who was removed from the game for quite some time, coming back to the sideline, and he's in what many would consider to be real rebuilding mode. But for Mack Brown, he says that the goal was to win right now. So that is the goal for Mack Brown at North Carolina. Jeff Brom has turned down Louisville, apparently. Jeff Brom, who, of course, was a Louisville quarterback, who you would think would want to go back to Louisville, who I fully expected to go back there for obvious reasons. It's a parallel program to Purdue. I wouldn't consider Louisville a step up or a step down. They've certainly been more successful than Purdue in the last 15 years. But Jeff Brom having all those ties to Louisville, I would have thought that he was going to go back and coach the Cardinals, but he has turned down Louisville. Jeff Brom is staying in the Big Ten at Purdue. And then also Paul Johnson stepping down after a long stay at Georgia Tech. And I hope when I get a chance here later in the week or maybe next week that I will break down the coaching tenures of Paul Johnson and then the return to the sideline of Mack Brown in North Carolina, Jeff Brom back in play at Purdue. And we've got a number of other coaching vacancies that will certainly pop up soon and have to be addressed. So it's that time of year. As soon as the last regular season game is played on that Saturday, a few openings pop up, as they did this year, but not as many as have had popped up in the past. But looking at as soon as the bowl games are complete, then we'll have another slew of openings. And then, of course, the initial wave of openings spur on more openings because guys leave their current jobs to go fill the openings that opened up. So about 4 initial openings turn into 10 or 12 or 14. All right, let's check out the live chat as we prepare for Georgia football talk with Savannah Lee Richardson from Bulldog Illustrated. Want to let you know that we've got the Voice of College Football newsletter going strong each and every Monday. So please send your email to my email. Send your email address to MarkRogersTV at Gmail, and we will get you our newsletter, The Voice of College Football, each and every Monday. I will not clutter up your inbox. I will only send the one mailing per week. It's on a Monday, and talk to anybody on the live chat, anybody else that is associated here with college, with Mark Rogers TV, The Voice of College Football, and they will stand up and support the newsletter. I'm sure they will. They'll do that for me and let you know that it's a worthy email to send, absolutely free, delivered right to your inbox each and every Monday. That's the Voice of College Football newsletter. So just send your email address to mine. It's a fair trade-off. Your email address to mine. I'm not going to do anything crazy or stupid or foolish or unethical with your email address. Scout's word. Your email address to mine, MarkRogersTV at Gmail. You will have my email address as well. And we'll get you out the Voice of College Football each and every Monday. And that will continue through the off season. We don't stop here at Mark Rogers TV, the Voice of College Football. So we will continue through the off season to provide you the newsletter for sure. We have live streams here each Wednesday night at 7 o'clock Eastern time, and then all day on Saturday with instant analysis as soon as the key games, the big games go final. And of course, outside of the MAC championship game on Friday night and the Pac-12 goes at it on Saturday, the rest of the games on Friday, the rest of the games will be on Saturday. So the other 8 conference championship games, it is my guarantee that I'll deliver previews and predictions of all 5 of the major Power 5 conference championship games here. And I'm going to try to get to the group of 5 games as well. The Mountain West, the Sun Belt, Conference USA, the MAC, and the American Conference. We will try to do that as well. We have also released today our look at the betting lines for championship weekend with Steve Merrill from Pro Sports Info. So that is released here at Mark Rogers TV, the Voice of College Football. And what else do we have for you? My top 25 that actually makes sense. My college football playoff rankings predictions. Soon will be, of course, we'll have to do something big on Sunday because Sunday is the day for the selections and probably only one real selection for the committee to make, and that's that number 4 position, most likely. And so we will do our best to bring you immediate reaction. I will be on a live stream, no doubt. Just need to coordinate that with between here and SD1 Sports. So we will coordinate that, and I will be on live Sunday as soon as those results become public and we know who will be in the college football playoffs. I will be on the line and talking to you, as I will be here in just a second. All right, it's Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who do we have on the line?
Hey, this is Navy Thomas 8, bro.
Hey, what's going on?
I just wanted to thank you for putting up a live stream because I really needed to get off Twitter because the Nebraska fans are just whining with no keys like Wisconsin over the Big Ten selection for the best players of the year.
Okay, so
and I know you saw some of that.
I saw a little bit of it, but I'm rolling in from work, so you keep me updated on some of this stuff that I'm not able to keep updated with otherwise. But I did see that the first, second, and third all Big Ten selections were made, and apparently your guy Adrian Martinez did not make the first, second, or third team, which I would guess those 3 spots are going to Dwayne Haskins, Shea Patterson, and Trace McSorley off the top of my head.
All I can say is they finished 4 and 8. So why is the line going on?
Yeah, develop.
Yeah, one more.
Yep.
One more to pop up. Paul Johnson is leaving Georgia Tech.
Yes.
He might make a good offensive coordinator for Nebraska.
For Nebraska, huh? Well,
he's got a history with Nebraska.
Well, you're also committing yourself to a style of offense if you do that, though. You know that you're shutting yourself off to a large portion of the high school recruits that you would get to play wide receiver in particular, but also quarterback. So you're committing yourself to a style of football that would be difficult to defend, but you're also shutting yourself off to a recruiting section.
But hey, it's Nebraska. We've always ran the triple option.
Well, you did at one time, sure. And that was the heyday. I don't know, Navy Thomas. It's an interesting thought. I don't necessarily know if that's going to work in 2018. At the level that you want it to work. To produce the results that you need at Nebraska.
Anyway, I just wanted to thank you for throwing up a live stream. So
I'll do that just about any time you'd like, Navy Thomas, at least for the time being. All right, Navy. We appreciate it, Tom. All right.
We'll talk to you later.
Absolutely. Navy Thomas, one of our ardent supporters, doing a great job. All right, so we've got Georgia, which I would consider to be one of the best football teams in America. How good is Alabama? How dominant have they been? They are a near 2-touchdown favorite against the Georgia Bulldogs. That game, of course, the SEC championship game, a rematch of the national championship game from 2017, 3:30 Eastern time on CBS. And we've got Savannah Lee Richardson standing by from Bulldog Illustrated to talk up the dogs. And Savannah, how you doing today?
Good. I'm just ready for the game on Saturday.
Are you ready? Are your boys ready? That's more important.
They seem to be. Or at least they look, like the 5 minutes or 7 minutes that we get during practice, they seem to be ready. We didn't get any availability today, but the last 2 days they were inside and it was business as usual. Not a whole lot of yelling and hyping them up or anything. It was more focusing on fundamentals and getting back to the basics and preparing for the biggest matchup since the national championship game.
Yeah, these guys are not used to being underdogs. They're basically overdogs. That even in the game that they lost this year, they were a touchdown favorite on the road at LSU. They were expected to be in this position to win the East easily, which, as it turned out, they did. Really, the main competitors were no competition head-to-head, Kentucky and South Carolina and Florida. And those teams turned out to be pretty good, especially Florida and Kentucky are going to major bowl games, going to decent bowl games, 9-3 seasons. So this Georgia team, in beating the quality of competition, I know that you had to put up with it for about half the season. Like, who have you played? Who have you played? And then once you played LSU, it was like, oh, you played one team and you lost by 20. But as it turned out, you played a number of good teams down the stretch. You beat them all. You beat them handily. So how would you compare this Georgia team with where you stood? I won't go all the way through the national championship game, but where you stood at a similar point in rematching Auburn, knowing that you lost by 29 points the first time around, needed to win that game, where the team stood at that point versus right now.
So you're like comparing them to last year's SEC championship game to now?
Sure.
Sure. Oh, well, I mean, the biggest thing is not having those senior leaders that Georgia had last season is probably one of the bigger qualities that they didn't have at all coming into the season. A big question all year long was whether or not that Georgia was going to have emerging people as leaders, and they definitely have. A lot of young guys have already bought in. A lot of the seniors have really stepped up and went into their own role as leaders. And so I think that's one of the bigger issues between last year and this year. Last year we kind of like almost expected to go to the SEC championship with the amount of talent that we had with Nick Chubb and Sonny Michelle, Roquan Smith and everything. And I think this year, not a lot of people, I mean, we all expected to make it to the SEC championship game, but at the same time, I don't think a lot of people expected Georgia to dominate teams every single week except for LSU. So there's a lot of similarities, I think, between last year and this year, but at the same time, I think this team has its own identity, and it's one that kind of excites me a little bit more than last year's team did, because last year's, it was like a Cinderella story, the revenge tour, making up for all the games that Kirby Smart got beaten his first year. Now it's more like this is what Georgia is. This is the expectations every single week. We're supposed to go in. We're supposed to dominate, make teams quit. And essentially that's what this is the expectation from here on out. It's 11-1 and making it the SEC championship game every year. So there's similarities, but at the same time, this one's a lot different in my opinion.
So Savannah, the revenge tour, it seems to me that I've heard that term before somewhere.
Probably me. Yeah.
No. I'm not going to let you off the hook. That is Michigan's deal. The Michigan printed the shirts with the revenge tour and all that.
Well, they still got beat by Ohio State. So
well, they did. They didn't complete the revenge tour. They got it against Michigan State, Wisconsin, and Penn State, and then they got annihilated. So they didn't complete the revenge tour. But I was just kidding you because Michigan's made a big deal out of that this year. They've been printing shirts and calling that their revenge tour. But you guys had the revenge tour last year.
Well, we get to finish it. Well, hopefully we have the opportunity to capitalize the last game of the revenge. I guess you can say revenge tour, getting beat in the national championship. But let Michigan talk about it. We really don't have to make shirts in Athens. We just kind of go each week, and we don't really need t-shirts to hype
your revenge tour wouldn't be much of a tour. It's kind of one stop. You got one team.
That's true too. Maybe we should have made
t-shirts last. You took care of Auburn. You took care of the other teams the year before or earlier in the year. All right, Savannah Lee Richardson joins us to talk the Bulldogs as Georgia takes on Alabama for the SEC championship, and many believing, and we'll see what the look of the game is, but many believing that these are already two of the top four teams in college football, so we'll see how it plays out. Obviously, if Georgia wins, then Alabama most likely still gets in, and there's two teams from the SEC. As I predicted before the season started. Let's put it on record right there. Well, it's already on record, actually, Savannah, that I picked Alabama to be 12-0 right now, and I picked Georgia to be 11-1.
There you go.
And I picked Georgia to beat Alabama preseason in the SEC championship game, and for both of them to make the college football playoff.
Well, I like it.
You good with that? Okay.
Yeah, I'm good with it.
Okay. So if you get left out, if you lose the game and get left out, I still think that there would be a ton of people, including myself, that would still think, okay, this is a top four team. They just got knocked out because of circumstances playing Alabama and losing another game somewhere else. But as you watch college football and see what else is out there, do you feel pretty good about this team being a top 4 team?
I mean, it's kind of hard not to say that they aren't a top 4 team when they have beaten opponents by 2 touchdowns or more since the LSU game. And so it's kind of hard not to say that they're one of the best, 2 of the best college football teams in the country. And I just think this Saturday is going to be the true test whether or not Georgia is really one of the best ones or not. But anyway, I mean, regardless, I think. But then again, I don't want to seem biased towards my team either. I'm sorry, no offense to you, but a loss to Purdue by Ohio State, in my opinion, automatically puts them out of it. The only other team that I would really consider would be Oklahoma.
Automatically?
Yeah,
they're automatically out because they lost the game.
The thing is you lost to Purdue by what, 21?
You lost to LSU by 20.
Yeah, but Georgia played how many ranked teams in a row, and
you didn't play Michigan. You didn't play Penn State.
They weren't scheduled. That's okay. If it means Alabama's out of it, sure.
We're reminding everyone that in the live chat room that if you have any comments or questions for Savannah, just leave them in the live chat, and I will try to catch them. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer this, if you have much interest in this, Savannah, but it's been asked, so I'll send it your way. I think the only connection somebody's making is that you're rivals, but of course, your focus is Georgia football and then the SEC East and then the SEC. Somebody's asking about Paul Johnson stepping down at Georgia Tech and if Georgia Tech's going to get a good coach in his place.
I mean, I sure hope so, because I would love to see the Georgia Tech rivalry be a little bit more competitive so the clean old-fashioned hate doesn't go away. I absolutely love the tradition of the Georgia Tech game, and I think it's something that Georgia needs to stick with. And so if Tech can find someone that can make them relevant and let them compete in the ACC, I think that's only going to make it better for Georgia in the long run. Really interesting to see that Paul Johnson stepped down today, because I think he would at least wait it out to the end of his contract, but I guess not. I'd love to see Tech find somebody young, fiery, and ready, and actually transform that team a little bit. Step away from the triple option and go more towards a modern football offensive scheme. But in my opinion, if they start to be good, it only is going to help Georgia in the long run.
So we had a caller on as you were hooking up and getting ready to comment. So I don't know if you heard him, and I was just making a similar statement to our guy, Navy Thomas, who's a big Nebraska fan, that if you hire Paul Johnson and he brings this offense, then you've basically shut yourself down to a lot of great recruits who are in no way, if you play wide receiver or quarterback, as a passing quarterback, going to come to that school. So I just think it's kind of a gimmicky thing to do in 2018. And you may trick a lot of teams, and you may be a difficult assignment for a lot of defenses and be able to win a lot of games because of what you do. But in terms of winning big time, you've eliminated a bunch of recruits. And so I just don't think it's the way to go myself. If I was Georgia Tech, I would completely dismiss myself and separate myself from that. That era was fine. Paul Johnson, you did a nice job. You had some really good seasons. Overall, you did okay. We're done. We're moving on. Get a hotshot young coach. Boom. Let's do something different, and let's get up with 2018. All right, let's get back to Georgia football's. The Bulldogs are taking on Alabama here. The one aspect of this, Savannah, I got to think that your team is different than any other team in college football in facing Alabama, is that the fear factor or the factor of the unknown is not there. So they took care of Clemson last year. So some of those Clemson players that line up against Alabama, if they meet in the playoffs, it's got to be running through their mind. These guys took care of us last year. And with a number of other teams, whether that's Ohio State or Oklahoma or somebody else, they haven't played Alabama. These players haven't. So there's that fear of the unknown. Alabama, they kill everyone. And until you gain some confidence, maybe by making some plays early in the game, that's got to be kind of a barrier. But for Georgia, you're in the unique position where these guys played toe-to-toe with Alabama, went to overtime. Really, even though Alabama won the game, nothing was proven in terms of one team's decidedly better than the other. It was pretty much a toss-up, so that that fear factor of Alabama dominance, I wouldn't think would be there.
I don't think it's there either. I don't think Georgia's the least bit scared of Alabama in terms of going head to head against them. If anybody can go head to head against Alabama, it's going to be Georgia, because when you look at the SEC, it's Georgia and Alabama, and then there's a big gap between everybody else.
And LSU, right?
And
I'm just kidding.
Well, no, I mean I would definitely put LSU up there, but even though they just were,
it was one game. I just
ridiculous.
You had a number of people in the live chat that were commenting on the LSU game, not letting you off the hook about the LSU game, and so
that's okay. I mean, Georgia's been completely dominant since the LSU game. It was a good wake-up call. It probably came at the right time. Georgia's peaking, in a sense, not peaking, but getting to the point where people are probably feeling a lot more, well, not people, but the staff is probably feeling a lot more comfortable heading into this game than they probably did when they played LSU. And so there's no fear there. The guys are hungry. I mean, I've never, like, when I say it's business as usual at football practice, there's usually, a little laughing here and there between the players and stuff. No, it was, let's get to work, let's get to business, and let's get ready for Alabama. And you need about as much concentration to get ready for Alabama as you probably do, like they did last week, getting ready for Tech, being a unique offense like Tech runs. They had to have an ultimate concentration, and I think that's exactly the same mentality as they're using this week. Not in a sense of preparing for a triple option offense, but in a sense of we are honed in on what Alabama does. We have to figure out how to stop it, and at all costs, we need to stop it. So that's what I mean by the concentrating and being, business as usual, high intensity practices. This is the game for all the marbles. I mean, this is a perfect opportunity for Kirby Smart to just be like, you know what, you got the best of us at the national championship, but I've been waiting for this for almost a year now, and it's go time.
Got go time for Savannah Lee Richardson from Bulldog Illustrated, prepping us for Georgia-Alabama football Saturday. This is the game we all expected. Sure, there's always the unknown. There's always the possibility that somebody else could jump in there. But this was the conference championship game that most of us saw coming, and this is what we got. And as Savannah pointed out, there is really no question that these are the two best teams in the SEC and maybe the country. And you can put this one in your back pocket and thank me later, Savannah. Anytime anybody challenges you about the LSU game, you can remind people that nobody has won the national championship in the college football playoff era that was undefeated. Everybody had lost a game that won the championship.
And all the people who were ranked number one heading into the, I don't think a number one seed has
won either. Yeah. Which is one of my points against the committee right there, that if they're so smart in selecting the four teams, why don't they get the one right and place them number one? If they know who the four best teams are, then they should be able to order them correctly.
Well,
all right. So what does concern you about this game?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to be concerned with. It's one of the most dominant offenses in the entire country with Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, I think he's already won the Heisman, regardless of how the game ends on Saturday. If Georgia wins, or if Alabama wins, or if he does a phenomenal job, I think he's already won the Heisman just because of how he has handled himself all season and just been phenomenal. How do you stop him? Well, I've been watching games all week and trying to figure out, a way to not be a homer, but also be like, look, Georgia still has a chance. And I've noticed once you put pressure on Tua, he can make a bad decision. Like the interception against, I think it was the Citadel. They actually got pressure on him and sacked him. And then the next play, he ran a hurry-up offense and ended up throwing the interception, if I'm correct. I believe I've watched a lot of film along with trying to study for tests.
I can't correct you on that one. I was not watching the Citadel game.
But
didn't catch that one.
They have a group of wide receivers that are there are three wide receivers that are ready to go to the NFL and will when they go to the NFL will be drafted probably in the first 3 rounds. They have 2 running backs, probably they have more than 2 running backs, but 2 running backs with Damian Harris and Najee Harris that can do what DeAndre Swift and Elijah Holyfield do to other defenses. It's 2 high-powered offenses, and Georgia's got to play the game of their life. They have to figure out a way to put pressure on Tua. I mean, there's one thing that I've noticed all season long. Georgia doesn't really necessarily run a lot of blitzing packages or anything like that. It's basic. We stop teams. We don't have to do the frilly-dilly and anything too aggressive. We beat them just by sheer grit and determination and base packages. And I think Georgia's going to come out guns blazing on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to have to blitz him. They're going to have to get him uncomfortable in the pocket, and don't give him any more than 2.5, 3 seconds to throw the ball, because if they let him sit in the pocket, he's going to destroy the secondary.
I would pop in the Mississippi State tape. I think they defended Alabama better than anyone. Alabama did get 2 touchdown drives put together the very first 2 times they had the ball. So they did drive it the length of the field, but not easily. But they went about 75 yards the first 2 series of the game. And then after that, they couldn't do anything. And Mississippi State's offense was giving their defense absolutely no chance. So the defense not only had to hold Alabama, basically they were on the field constantly the rest of that game. And they have 2 dominant ends in Montez Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons. They've got Jerry Green, who's an excellent D tackle. They have one of the best fronts in college football, and that was the hope for Auburn last week, is that they would be able to duplicate that effort, but they couldn't, or they did for about a half. But anyway, they couldn't. But that was Mississippi State. I thought they played the best defense against Alabama this season. It was pretty much, again, 2 touchdowns, and then they pretty much held them the rest of the way.
I think a big thing, too, with Mississippi State and all of the games that we've seen Alabama go up against is they can hang in for a half, but the thing is you don't see like with Mississippi State, they couldn't score. They couldn't put any points on the board. And I don't think that's not going to be the case on Saturday with Georgia. Georgia's going to put points on the board. Georgia averaged it, like DeAndre Swift's averaging 6.9 yards a carry right now. Holyfield's averaging 6.7. Georgia's offensive line is clicking on all cylinders. Georgia's going to put points on them, and they're going to keep Alabama's defense on their toes. That's one of the things that I think is standing out, besides all year long where Alabama has pretty much dominated people. They haven't really played an offense that was as prolific as them. And I think Georgia has the talent, has a quarterback that can do it, and then they have also 2 running backs, well, the offensive line as well, that they could definitely score some points on Alabama's defense.
Are you a Texas and Northwestern fan this weekend?
I mean, I haven't even looked at any other games besides this one, to be honest, but I would probably choose Texas without a doubt.
So if you can't get the job done against Alabama, you get those 2 upsets, you could still get selected.
It's an option for sure. I'm trying not to really, think about it too much, because I'd much rather beat Alabama and be in regardless. I don't want to have to depend on Texas or Northwestern or anybody else in the country to have to lose for Georgia to be considered one of the top 4 teams in the country. I think Georgia needs to go in and do the job and show the world that they deserve to be there and that they deserve to be in the top 4. I don't like having to depend on others to lose.
Got Georgia and Alabama, as expected, at the SEC championship game in Atlanta, and the Bulldogs looking to defend. Let's not forget, everyone, who is the SEC champion. Let's understand that Georgia is the defending SEC champion, and that's what they're playing for this Saturday. This college football playoff business is exciting, but everybody gets hypersensitive and focused on that. Let's not forget there's a conference championships on the line in Alabama, though they are the national champion. Georgia won the SEC championship, and they are the reigning champions, taking on Alabama. All right, let's see. How much of the Dogs have I seen this year? So I saw basically the Florida game. I saw most of the Kentucky game until it got out of hand, and then I was off to something else. I saw some of the South Carolina game. I didn't waste my time with Georgia Tech. Who else did you play? LSU. I saw most of that game as well. So as we're coming down the stretch, are there any particular players on either side of the ball that you think are really coming of age, are much better players in November than they were in September?
On both sides, on Georgia and Alabama, or just Georgia? Georgia, Jeremiah Hallman definitely, despite Jeremiah Hallman kind of emerging all season long, he has gotten so much better at blocking, setting up the block for a long run or whatever, and he excites me. He's got big hands. He can go up and catch any ball that's really thrown to him. If he has an opportunity to go up and get it, he's going to be able to get it. Another Javon Wims kind of guy, and Georgia needs one of those, especially this weekend. I also think that DeAndre Swift is a much, much better running back than he was in September, fighting a groin injury. He is now the last, I believe, 3 out of the 4 games he's rushed for over 100 yards. So he is hitting his stride, and he's really, really impressive to watch right now. It's almost like, all right, I'm going to get the ball, and I dare you to try to pull me down. I really want to give credit to Lamont Gilliard, even though he was on probably most people's preseason center of the year, or, whatever list you want to put him on. I think he has tremendously turned into one of the biggest leaders on this team. I watch him all the time getting into those huddles and just commanding the offensive line and really taking control and doing his job. And I wish he had one more season, because he was actually brought into Georgia as a defensive lineman and turned into the center, which is kind of crazy to think, but he's embraced it so well. And so I wish he had one more year to get fully developed, but I think he's going to get drafted. That entire offensive line has really improved to be as young as they are with one senior on it. It's probably one of the best offensive lines in the entire country.
That would be the Remington Award.
The Remington, yes, that's
named
right.
after Dave Remington. Do you know where he played?
No.
I did this to you another time or two. So this is part of my college football education historically. I know you're all over what's going on right now. Dave Remington, Nebraska.
Okay. I figured it was like one of the Midwestern schools or something. Isn't that where most of these people came from? Isn't that when all the Midwestern schools?
Well, this wasn't like Bronco Nagurski and those guys playing back in the 20s and 30s. Dave Remington was like an 80s guy.
Okay, cool.
It wasn't that long ago.
I need to do better on my college football history.
No. That's not what I meant. I just thought I would throw that in there.
But yeah, I'm excited. God, you want me to talk about people who are better? That Jordan Davis. And it's funny because Kirby Smart said in one of his many press conferences that he wished that Jordan Davis didn't travel the first couple away games, and he had wished that he had taken the time and let Jordan come out there and travel, because if he would have let him travel earlier in the season, there's no telling where he would be now. Malik Herring has tremendously improved on the defensive front. Without David Marshall, he suffered a foot injury. He's been out since before Florida. And so we've had Jordan Davis, Malik Herring, 2 young guys, a true freshman and a true sophomore, really step up on the D-line, not to mention Tyler Clark and Jonathan Ledbetter. But there's so many players because Georgia's so young. It's kind of like, well, you see somebody new every game making a big play. Adam Anderson in the last 3 weeks is somebody that just excites me. He needs like 15, 20 pounds of muscle. And when he gets that, he already looks like a grown man, but once he gets control of his body, oh my goodness, he's going to be so much fun to watch. But there's plenty. I can talk for days about players. I
know you can talk about Georgia for days. I know that. That's a good thing. That's why we have you on. And each Sunday, Savannah, I flip on the Red Zone Network. I'm a big Red Zone NFL guy, and flip on the Red Zone. And 2 guys keep popping up that I know you're excited about. And one is your favorite NFL team connection. So that's got to be great when you see one of your number 1 Georgia guys, number 1 jersey on his back as well, goes to the New England Patriots, and then Nick Chubb as well. So Sony and Nick, they're doing great in the NFL.
Oh, I'm so proud of Nick and Sony. Sony overcoming injury and getting back out there and rushing for 133 yards this past weekend was just awesome to see. He's not letting anything get past him. He's showing the world exactly what he can do. And then Nick Chubb continued. The number 1 on the ESPN top 10, Nick Chubb. It doesn't get any better than that. Being able to see Georgia as the I don't even know the last time Georgia was even in the top 10 of the ESPN, or a Georgia player anyway. And so I'm super excited for him. I mean, it's fun to see. You can't forget about Roquan Smith either, leading the Bears in tackles. So Georgia's got plenty of NFL talent, and it all came from last year's Cinderella year. But at the same time, I'm glad that they're doing well. But I'm excited to see what these boys can do on Saturday.
Saturday. I can't wait. 3:30 Eastern time. I love these college football games when I don't have a dog in the hunt. Pardon the pun there, but I can just kick back and watch and relax and see what happens. And I think it's going to be a really good game. We'll see what I predict once I figure this thing out. But the two again went toe to toe last year for the national championship, right down to the wire. And I think Georgia should be ready for this. And again, I don't think it can be overstated that they're just in a different place than any other team in the country in regards to knowing that they can play Alabama. And sure, some players are different, but 75-80% of those guys knowing, hey, we did this last year. We were on the same field. We know how fast they are, how big, how physical. We're the same, cut from the same cloth. We're two great teams, just freakish athletes all over the place. So we know that we can play with them, and that's different than any other team mentality has to be at this point, since Alabama is just drubbing everyone.
Yeah. And if any team can do it, like I said before, I think it's without a doubt Georgia. And this isn't I don't know how to explain it. They're resilient. They're gritty. They have this determination to them. They want it so bad. And, I was talking with my aunt actually earlier today, and we were talking about how many championships Alabama had won, how many times they had been on the stage, how many times they had gone to the national championship. How did they continue to get excited every single year to, play on that big of a stage? When you look at Georgia, who hasn't won a national championship in almost 40 years, it may come down to who wants it more in the end. And Georgia's got a big heart, and they have a chip on their shoulder. And the last 4 weeks have definitely shown how big of a chip they've had on their shoulder, because they have done everything that they were supposed to do to get to this spot in the SEC championship, to get to face Alabama again, and to get to see in the exact same place round 2. And so it's just the sheer. Someone asked me the other day, what's going to be a big factor to you? And I was like, or what is a big factor in Georgia? What is going to give them the edge? And I was like, their resilience on defense. And he was like, well, that's not a way to, win a ball game, resilience. And I was like, actually, if you go back and watch Georgia, they don't quit. They don't give up. And I think that's a huge part to their identity is that resilient and that chip on their shoulder that they carry every single week since the LSU game, for sure. And so I'm ready to see it. It's my first SEC championship game as in person anyway, as a fan and even as a journalist, and I'll be on the sidelines, and I'm excited. Regardless of the outcome, it's going to be a historic game. It's going to be so much fun to watch. And
Apex Orca 78. Thank you for encouraging everyone to hit the like button. We appreciate that. Definitely. Thank you. George L. Yes, you make a great point, and I completely agree. They are different teams, and I argue that all the time, that this is always a new team this particular year, and you can't always look at last year and say, well, this happened last year. It's the same team. Yes, they've got the same uniforms on. I understand they're two different teams, but aside from about roughly 10 or 12 players on each team that were key players, there's a ton of guys out there that are going to be out there again. So there's a culture, there are coaching staffs that are the same. Their entire programs are the same. Yes, there's 10 or 12 players roughly on each team that were key players that aren't there. I get that. You're totally right. They're not the same teams. I don't judge teams the same as many of you who get on here and argue with me and say Ohio State lost to Iowa by 50 points last year. How can they be in the playoff this year? And I'm always like, well, it's a different year, and that's just one example. So I make that point all the time. I completely agree with that. I'm just basically saying that these are still two elite teams. Nothing has changed from that standpoint.
Nope. Nothing at all. And I mean, I give all the credit in the world to Alabama, because if you look at Alabama on paper, probably should beat Georgia statistic-wise. The only thing that Georgia has a better statistic than them is rushing offense. I mean, Alabama just should mop the floor with Georgia. But that's why you don't just look at stats when you're talking about a game. And so I'm excited. I don't know. I don't think I've been excited every week, but like this is just a completely different stage. This is a completely different level. And it's exciting to be here because I was reading an article earlier today and it said, like Georgia fans and Georgia people in general need to realize like the last time that we got as far as we did, like for example, 2012, the next year we were like out of it or nearly out of it. And this year, back-to-back years going 11-1 in the SEC championship and have the opportunity to beat Alabama for an SEC championship, which we're the first team since I think Florida to win an SEC championship since then. And so if Georgia ends up beating them tomorrow, that's an even sweeter thing is because Alabama's so dominant in the SEC, especially in Atlanta.
To be fair, Savannah, I'm going to mention a comment from the chat room.
That's fine.
Because of one of your points concerning Georgia's character and quality here from Jonathan Jennings, who mentions 36-17 against LSU. Was that displaying Georgia resiliency?
No, it wasn't. I think that was a wake-up call. I said it earlier. Huge wake-up call for Georgia. I firmly believe that we came into Death Valley way too confident, and LSU punched Georgia in the mouth, and they never could get anything else going. Granted, Georgia didn't try Justin Fields or anything else, but there's no excuses. They got punched in the mouth. They got beat by LSU, and LSU was the better team that day. However, it's not how you define. It's not the loss that defines you. It's how you define yourself after the loss. If you can go back, and that's exactly what Georgia did. They came back after the bye week, destroyed Florida, destroyed Kentucky when nobody gave Georgia a shot in the dark because all they heard all week long was Benny Snell this and Benny Snell that.
Nobody gave Georgia a shot in the dark. They were a 10-point favorite.
Well, that's me saying that is at the post-game interviews in Kentucky, a lot of the linebackers and stuff were like, nobody gave us a chance this week. That was coming from them. Granted, I know of but there was a lot of people that picked Kentucky. Tim Tebow picked Kentucky. I think even like another person off of the SEC network picked Kentucky. Not a shot in the dark, but everybody predicted Kentucky to upset us. They didn't. We ran over them. And then we came back home. Well, no, where did we go after that? We demolished Auburn. And then we demolished a Tech team, and that's the best I've ever seen a Georgia defense play against Tech. There's just, we didn't let that loss define us as a team, just like they didn't let the loss define them as a team last year. So,
okay, where are you going to be on Saturday during the game?
On the sidelines.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Very good. So Savannah Lee Richardson there at the Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Is that what they call this thing now?
Yeah, it's the Mercedes-Benz Dome or Stadium. I don't know.
Okay.
What is called the Benz?
Yeah, it's in Atlanta. It's Georgia, Alabama for the SEC championship and a possible repeat of two teams from the SEC in the national championship Final Four. We shall see how things turn out. Certainly many would expect that if Georgia pulls off the upset and Alabama loses narrowly, that they still get into the playoff. There's still a possibility, believe it or not, based on what I just stated a few minutes ago, that even if Alabama wins, that Georgia can make it into the playoff. They would certainly need to show themselves worthy with a close loss in the SEC championship game. All right, Savannah, enjoy the game. Have a great trip, and certainly we wish you the best.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Savannah Lee Richardson from Bulldog Illustrated. Please join her and the rest of the team there covering Georgia football. And I will take your calls as we get set for just a few minutes away for Shane Roberts, who will join us from the Block U to talk Pac-12 football with the championship game coming up on Friday night, Utah and Washington. Somebody here predicted Utah and Washington to make the Pac-12 championship game in August, and somebody here predicted Alabama, Georgia, which I'm sure many of you did as well. No great feat there. All right, the call-in number is 860-325-3687. Let me get that in the live chat, 860-325-3687. So I typically run down the schedule for college football on Saturday. Fortunately, with only 10 games total, 8 on Saturday, 2 on Friday. We don't have too many conflicts because, as you guys know from watching me on a regular basis, that's my big dilemma on Saturday is how am I going to watch 6 games at the same time? And I'm always figuring out, okay, well, if this game gets to 28-0, now I'm going to flip to that game. And I've got that game on my second monitor and this one on my third. And we've got a call coming in as we await Shane Roberts joining us from SB Nation's Block U to talk Utah football. This is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
How you doing, Mark? This is Carl. I think you know me by a Kane fan in the script.
Whoa. Carl, what's your handle?
Carl.
Yeah, I know your name, Carl. What's your handle online?
Oh, no. It just says Carl. But I refer to myself as a Kane fan in distress.
Oh, okay. I gotcha. How are you? You're in distress.
I'm doing well. How you doing, man?
I'm doing just fine.
That's good. I haven't been able to catch your recent lives because I've been kind of busy, but I'm happy I was able to catch tonight. I just wanted to touch on like the championship games this weekend. You know, I really like the matchups. I feel like every game is a toss-up, and I think we're in for one surprise this weekend. One, and I think that's the Big Ten championship. I think Ohio State is going to come up that Michigan high, and then they're going to take an L to Northwestern. I don't know how, but it's going to be epic, and then Urban's just going to make his way out.
So you're predicting Northwestern to upset Ohio State, and that to be the last game for Urban Meyer at Ohio State. Well, after their bowl game, I guess.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, I wouldn't be too surprised.
It just feels right. That's why it just feels right. I can't tell you why. It's no like logical sense, but you know, whenever you get that feeling, that itch, like man, maybe I should go with this line. I should go for the upset. I just feel like it's gonna happen. I feel like Ohio State season has been trending towards this type of movement, where they climaxed, and now it's time to come down.
Well, I don't think we should overreact to the Michigan game. It was a tremendous effort, an amazing offensive display, in particular against what many thought to be the nation's #1 defense. We know now that's not the nation's #1 defense, but it's still a really good defense. So they performed when they needed to, backs against the wall, against the best team on the schedule. But yeah, that was one performance. They haven't consistently gone out there for 3 or 4 weeks against good competition and played solid football in all 3 phases. They have yet to do that. And so we shouldn't be surprised, even though they're a much more talented team, we shouldn't be surprised if they go out there and struggle or lose. I wouldn't be shocked by a loss. I'd be somewhat surprised. Ohio State's a much better team than Northwestern, but I wouldn't be shocked. Northwestern was only down by a field goal to Notre Dame late in the game with 2 or 3 minutes left. They led Michigan 17-0 before losing 20-17. They've beaten Wisconsin and Iowa and Purdue and some decent teams. So Northwestern's nothing to take necessarily that lightly. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Buckeyes, again, as you mentioned, had a letdown, as Northwestern had the luxury to rest a lot of starters in this game against Illinois last week, and Pat Fitzgerald took a bit of a calculated risk in resting his starters and only winning by 1 score against Illinois, but that may pay off.
When you look at the game and you just think about both teams, their mentality, their mindset, like coming into the game, Northwestern is going to be on a rise for this game because they're like, okay, this is Ohio State. You know, this is our opportunity to shine. And then the one thing that was mentioned on another show was that Northwestern's running back was the #1 player in the state of Ohio last year, and he did not get offered by Ohio State. And you know he's gonna be trying to show out. So I mean, everything just feels like it's setting up for that. Like that's gonna be the domino that knocks it all down. Because Ohio State defense, I don't care. I mean, Michigan, who rarely scores past 30, put up 39, even though it was a blowout because Ohio State just kept scoring in the second half, but still put up 39. And you're talking about an anemic offense, an offense that's not really built to put up to score close to 40 points. Still put up 39 on Ohio State, and Ohio State has struggled setting the edge. That's why teams have been able to run under. But
Well,
just to skip on that.
well, just real quick, Carl. I just want to cut you off real quick because I can't let a few of those comments go. So, being a English journalism broadcast major, I can't let some of these references slip by, and some of these the names you're putting in description on some of the. So Michigan's offense is not anemic. Anemic would be one of the worst offenses in the Big Ten or in the country. They are not anemic on offense. That's not even close to the truth. Okay, so that's a little strong. And that Ohio State's defense didn't play well. I thought they played a very good game. Most of those points were inconsequential. And their special teams basically gave up one touchdown on a fumbled kickoff at the 9-yard line. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can agree with some of that, but when you look at Michigan, the reason why I think when you look at Michigan's offense,
yeah,
it's not really predicated on scoring. It's really predicated on scoring enough, controlling the ball, and controlling the time of clock.
Sure.
That's
so if they're dominant,
that's
absolutely, they're not. So I made the comment in my preview that Ohio State was facing the best offense that they had faced this year. That didn't necessarily mean Michigan was going to score the most points because, as you mentioned, they eat up the clock, they chew up yardage, they have a lot of drives that they would consider successful because they drive at 40 yards and they punt just to flip a field position. But no, they don't have an explosive or dynamic offense, but I wouldn't consider it anemic.
I just don't see it as a scoring offense because even when you say Patterson, I mean he isn't flinging the rock for touchdowns. That offense it's like watching a snail move, especially when you look at an offense like Ohio State. Maybe I'm being like too myopic in my view, but when you look at offenses like Oklahoma, teams only Ohio State, teams Bama, teams that only need 2 minutes to hold the ball and score. And you look at Ohio State, Miami, those are anemic offenses. They're pro style. The only person who runs a pro style and can run up the scoreboard is Jimbo Fisher that I can think of in my mind right now.
Wait a minute. What did you have to say about the Miami offense?
It's anemic.
Okay.
I'm going to be
absolutely.
Honest. That's my team, so it's anemic. It's an atrocity. It's a walking atrocity watching Miami's offense. But all right, so to skip that, to point or move on from that point, the Big 12 championship, man, I don't know. I think it's a flip of the coin. It's a flip of the coin because for a single team to beat a team twice in a season is hard. It's hard. It's hard, especially a rivalry team. It's hard. That Texas versus Oklahoma, and I really believe in Kyler Murray, but I feel like Oklahoma is. I don't know. It's like I want to go to Texas, but then I feel like Kyler Murray's gonna, he's gonna steal that Heisman this weekend. So I don't know, but that's gonna be a really good game. Who do you think is gonna win that game between Texas and Oklahoma?
Well, comes this time of year, Carl, and I get caught between wanting my preseason prediction to come true versus what I think is going to happen in the here and now. So my preseason prediction was Texas and Oklahoma to play in the Big 12 championship game and Texas to win. That was my preseason prediction. Now that they've played, and when you make this statement, it's difficult for a team to beat another team twice. I don't disagree with that. I also don't necessarily support it. I don't know what the facts would tell us on that. I know that that's a common theme, a common argument that sports people make. Just based on, I guess, perception. And I don't know if that can be backed up by facts. We could go through, I could run through all the conference championship games from all the seasons and all the conferences and do a metric on that if I wanted to take the time and add it up and say, a team is 17-12 when they have to face the other team a second time. But I don't know what that number is. But yeah, a common thought is that, yes, when you line up against a team again, they have just, even if you're playing for a championship and the incentive should be equal, they have just a little bit more of an edge because you beat them the time before, where you tend to relax a little bit more because you beat them. Plus, they have more adjustments to make. You're thinking, okay, we were successful, so what different schemes and how do we approach this game any differently? Well, we were successful, so why would we approach it any differently? Versus the team that's unsuccessful, they look at the film and figure out, okay, this is where we let down, therefore we're going to correct those issues. And that's why I think, again, I can't back this up statistically, but that the team that lost the first game has a bit of an edge the second time around.
I agree. It's just more poster board material. You know, they're just gonna. It's just gonna be hard. It's gonna be a good game. That might be the best game of the weekend. It might be. It just might be.
I think it probably will be. Yeah, I would not be surprised.
I'm not even sure. I'm not even sure like who I would go with. That's probably something I would just stay away from because it's just too many. There's too many variables. Too many variables at play. The SEC championship, I'm going with Bama. Because they have that championship character. You know, like I said, I'm tired of Bama. I'm tired of seeing Bama win, but I don't see Georgia beating. Georgia lost way. I mean, they were a senior Latin team last year, and they lost a lot of talent, a lot of leadership. I just don't see it. I posted my prediction in the comments. I have Bama scoring about 35 and Georgia going about 17. You know, unless only way for Georgia to win is if Jake Fromm just goes off, because they will not pummel Bama in the running game. It's just you're not gonna Bama, and I feel like that's one of Kirby Smart's problem. You need to spread Bama out, and then that may enhance their running game, but you aren't gonna pummel Bama. You aren't gonna line up, you know, in 21 set, you know, and just run the ball at Bama. It's not gonna happen. Nick Saban, you know, he perfected that type of play, so he's not going for that. When I look at Georgia's secondary, that's also a question mark. Yes, they have DeAndre Baker, but the opposite side of that, Tyson Campbell has started. And the only reason why I know so much about you know their corners is because they're both from Miami, so I follow both of them. And Tyson Campbell he started, and he's burnt chicken. As Shaq would say, every game or every competent team they face always targets him. So when you look at Bama's receiving corps, the best receiving corps in the nation with Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs, I mean, I don't really see how Georgia is going to stop them. And also with Bama, one thing I picked up with Bama is Bama has been doing a lot of quick throws. They've incorporated more quick passes into just to, you know, suck in the defense more because the defenses were playing off of them because they're so explosive. But now, when you start throwing in the quick passes to Henry Ruggs, what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
All right, so you've knocked out the Big Ten, the SEC, the Big 12 for us. Anything else for us?
Nah, not really, man.
Okay.
I just want to say, continue, keep up the good work. Continue, have a good one.
Thanks, Carl.
Also, I have, I think I have Utah this weekend.
All right.
I don't really watch Pac-12 football, so I'm just going with Utah just because their quarterback is from Miami and they have co players from Miami on the team. All
right, Carl. Our next guest will be happy to hear that you picked Utah. Have a good night, Carl.
All right, have a good one.
All right, Carl, what did he call him? The distressed Kane fan or something like that on the line here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. So we've got the Pac-12 as the kickoff event of the championship weekend, of course, on Friday night. Utah making its first appearance at 9-3, taking on Washington, looking for a second Pac-12 championship in 3 seasons. We've got Shane Roberts from Block U. It's the SB Nation platform for Utah athletics on the line. Shane, how you doing tonight?
Good. How about you, Mark?
I'm doing great. It's great to have you back here at Mark Rogers TV. Shane used to join us a number of times as we had a show that we would launch each and every Wednesday night, Pac-12 breakdown, and we'd kick it around with a number of Pac-12 bloggers. So, of course, your Utes have made it to the Pac-12 championship game for the first time. I know that before we get to that there was a whole lot riding on Saturday night's game, trailing 20-0, making that valiant comeback. completing that was important to you and the throngs of people in the state of Utah, because as we've discussed many times, I know that it's an important rivalry, and people around the country know it as, okay, Utah, BYU, they're rivals, but don't grasp the intensity and the football style hate between the two teams. So if you can give us a feel for some of the rhetoric before and after the game and how the game played out, and just how much that means to Utah, in addition to going to the Pac-12 championship game, which of course was already wrapped up.
Yeah, it's the Utah BYU rivalry has evolved dramatically since Utah's moved to the Pac-12, and BYU is now an independent. So the level of importance of the game has really shifted. It's an important game for Utah in terms that it is an in-state rivalry, so it's always good to win the state championship. But big picture wise, the game really isn't that important because, as you alluded to, Utah already had the Pac-12 South locked up. The Pac-12 championship game a week later. Whereas with BYU, they're just trying to schedule almost anybody and everybody that they can get scheduled. So they need everybody they can get. And since Utah's now won 8 consecutive games in the series, they want to beat Utah any way possible. So they're approaching desperation. Amongst the fans, it's a really interesting dynamic because a lot of Utah fans, I'm not sure what the split is, but I know plenty of them would like to see the series not necessarily stop. There is a group that would like to see it stop because they like to troll BYU fans and say that you're not important enough to play anymore. But there's a large contingent that would like to see kind of a rotating series between BYU and Utah State, and kind of spread that around since we only get 3 non-conference games outside of the 9 conference games. But for that particular game, it's always fun to beat those guys down there because during the Lavelle Edwards years, obviously he went on a giant tear. He beat Utah year after year after year. But starting in about 1993, Ron McBride started to flip that narrative. And of course, as I alluded to, Utah's now won 8 consecutive games. Every one of those is now in the Pac-12 era. Utah's in a Power 5 conference. BYU is a G5 team. So there's obviously the in-state bragging rights. But that game was interesting because going into the game, a lot of media and fans was asking Kyle Whittingham if he was going to rest some starters going into the Pac-12 title game, because those BYU games are usually really, really physical. Dudes get banged up, beat up, get really emotional. But he said, no, we're treating it like a regular game. And sure enough, every starter did play in the game. But for the first 2.5 to 3 quarters, Utah was sleepwalking through that game. They fell behind 20-0 at halftime. They just didn't have the fire and the intensity, whereas BYU, they came out all guns blazing. They were throwing haymakers left and right. It wasn't until near the end of the 3rd quarter, after Utah had a very nice sustained drive and got a touchdown pass to pull the lead from 27-7 to 27-14. That's when the energy in the stadium really picked up, and that's when you could kind of tell the players were like, hey, enough of this. And the next probably about 15 to 20 minutes of game time, Utah dominated. They finished the game on a 35-7 run. Once they really decided to end the game, they ended the game. They were fortunate that they woke up when they did, because BYU could have easily won that game. There was some very questionable decisions on their side of the field with some offensive play calling. They had some injuries, some attrition. But ultimately, when Utah decided to end it, they put an end to it. So 8 straight in the rivalry series, and it's getting really one-sided right now.
We're talking Utah football with the Utes taking on Washington for the Pac-12 championship Friday night. We've got Shane Roberts on the line from Block U. It's the SB Nation platform for Utah athletics. Shane, I was agonizing in the preseason because I always take my predictions down to like a day before kickoff in terms of my season-long predictions, because I was very convicted that Utah was the best team in the Pac-12 South and would be this year. But I looked at the schedule and you know better than I do that you had to play the most difficult schedule in the conference. That in comparing your schedule and who you drew from the North compared to some other teams, like, for example, USC didn't have to play Washington. Arizona didn't play anyone. I don't know how they make up these schedules, and they completely bypass, Washington State, or, on down the line. But anyway, you had to play all the tough teams from the north and missed Oregon State. So you had the most difficult path. And so it came down to me. Well, I think, I think Utah is going to win the head-to-head against USC at home, and that's going to break a tie. And then it was very strange that I was looking at the standings prior to the Arizona State game, and you guys were in first place. And then I looked and saw Arizona State. Wow, they're only 2-3, but they win this game. They've got a tie. They propel themselves into a tie, and then they've got the tiebreaker. Could Arizona State possibly win this division? And so for a few weeks, it was in peril because Arizona State obviously beat you guys. But in the long run, you proved to be the best team.
Yeah, it was. Utah was set up to fail by the conference on so many levels. Before the season, obviously, me and people on my site, we usually go around and kind of prognosticate. And when you go game by game by game, I actually picked the Utes to go 11-1 because as I looked at each game in a silo, I figured Utah's better than this team, Utah's better than this team, Utah's better than this team. But then, as one of my counterparts, Alex, he's like, well, that's all well and good, but at the same time, not only did Utah play all the best teams in the Pac-12 North, but they also had 2 short week games, 2 Saturday to Friday games, a couple of them on the road. They're the only team in the league that I believe had back-to-back road games in multiple weeks. And I was like, ooh, yeah, you're right. That's a really tough road to hoe, but I had that conviction that Utah was better than SC. They were better than ASU. They were better than all these teams, but yeah, they were set up to fail. And then after starting 0-2 in conference, so losing to Washington and Washington State, things were looking pretty dicey. Albeit that Washington State game, Utah defensively was out of control. They shut them down. They just couldn't figure out how to score a point. Similar story against Washington State. They held Washington State to 28 points, I believe. And they really hemmed them in, but their second half game plan was really poor, and they let that game get away from them. The Stanford game, Utah figured it out. They put everything together. They ended up blowing Stanford out on the road. They scored over 40 points, 40-21, I believe. And then it was rolling from there. And then, as you alluded to, the Arizona State game happened. And then there's just something about Tempe. The moment that ASU week started, I just felt terrible about that game, just because going to Tempe, going to the desert, has just been historically terrible for the Utes. They got off the schneid there a few years ago, but they have Nikhil Harry, Benjamin. They have some dudes down there, and I just kind of figured there's some bad stuff formulating for the Utes. And sure enough, Tyler Huntley got knocked out of that game, broke his collarbone. The offense was very hit or miss. The defense struggled more so than they had struggled all season long. And sure enough, they lost that game, thus losing the tiebreaker to Arizona State. So we're all sitting up here in Salt Lake thinking we're going to have a 6-3 conference record. We're going to be 4-1 in the division. That one loss being to Arizona State, but we played Oregon, we played Stanford, we played at Washington, we played Washington State, and we're going to end up losing this thing. Fortunately, a couple of weeks ago, after we beat Colorado in a blizzard, we all turned into giant Oregon Ducks fans, which is hard to say. But we were rooting like crazy for the Ducks against Arizona State. And Oregon tried to lose that game so many times, but they pulled it out and clinched the division for the Utes. And you just could feel this giant monkey come off the back of every Utah fan, coach, and player as they finally clinched the division and eventually rolled in that rivalry game. Yeah, it was a crazy schedule to say the least.
And Shane, I think that's fortunate for College Football Nation, because I've got no rooting interest in any of this, but I just see Utah and Washington as a much better game than Arizona State against Washington. You talked about the offense. The Northern Illinois game also comes to mind as being a brutal offensive performance. You mentioned the 7 points against Washington early. How has the offense developed with Tyler Huntley at quarterback?
Well, you could tell those first 4 games of the season, Utah was really just trying to try new things and try to figure some stuff out, because they returned most of the offense from last season, and they'll actually return most of the offense going into the next season too. A lot of sophomores on this team. But they really figured out their identity with Zach Moss coming out of Northern Illinois, going into Washington State. They just started to ride Zach Moss the entire way. They've reestablished their identity as a run-first power run team, and that's what they rolled with. And out of that, they were deadly in play action. A lot of tight end passing. Brenton Covey getting into the action, coming back from his 2-year Mormon mission. One of the telecasts that Utah was on, I think it was Brock Heward on ESPN. He was comparing Utah to the LA Rams because they run some very similar offensive sets, kind of this very unique bunch 2 tight end look, to where they'll have 2 tight ends at the end of the line, the running back right behind the quarterback under center, and they were deadly out of that set. They haven't done as much the last few weeks because, as I mentioned, Tyler Huntley went down against Arizona State, broke his collarbone, so Jason Shelley came in the last 3 games. But the offense really hasn't changed under Shelley. He's very much a very similar quarterback. But a lot of us around Salt Lake have always said the defense has always been a championship level defense. Special teams have always been championship level. If Utah could ever figure out the offensive side of the ball, watch out. And sure enough, they're now in the top third of the Pac-12 in offensive efficiency, putting up plenty of yards, good points. And what happens? They're now in the Pac-12 championship game with an opportunity to go to the Rose Bowl. So as long as they remember their identity of run the ball, pass, I want to say selectively. We're not talking like Navy here, but we're saying pass when it's needed, be very efficient in the passing game. Utah's a very hard team to beat when they're rolling.
Well, you mentioned, Shane, this offense being different with Zach Moss getting rolling after the Northern Illinois game, but he stopped rolling, unfortunately, after the Arizona State game. So here's a kid that's got 1,000 yards and 11 touchdowns, but and was the known commodity on this offense starting the season. But he's done. You know what's going on from here in regards to generating a ground attack?
Yeah, the Moss thing, the Huntley and Moss was a 1-2 punch, losing both those guys. Right? Obviously, we lost Huntley in the Arizona State game. We lost Moss the subsequent days after the Arizona State game. And it sounds like just a freak injury, a pre-existing thing that his knee eventually just locked up on him, and he had to have knee surgery. But backing him up is Armand Shine. And Armand Shine was actually beat out Zach Moss 2 seasons ago. So he was a previously starting running back for the Utes, but he just completely destroyed his knee against Arizona a couple seasons ago at Rice Eccles Stadium. Just blew it out. So he had to sit out the rest of that season. And then going into the last season, he had another injury, so he actually redshirted last year. So Utah had a proven starting running back sitting right behind Moss. Is he Zach Moss? No, he's not. Zach Moss just kind of has that different level than a lot of college running backs have. But Shine is a very damn good backup. Like I said, he'd probably start on a lot of P5 teams. And then behind Shine, you have TJ Green. He's a redshirt freshman out of Arizona. That kid has me super excited. He's very fast, very shifty, very elusive. But you can tell he's still trying to figure out the speed of the game. He likes to bounce it outside a lot instead of sticking his nose up in there. But once he figures it out, I think without a doubt, he's the future of Utah football at the running back position. But 2 very good running backs that backed up Moss. They're not Moss, but for all, for what happened, very pleased with what they have behind him.
Yeah, you mentioned the name Britton Covey. And when I was doing my preseason work, looking at the Utes and trying to get familiar with the personnel, and most of these names were familiar. And then I came across Covey, and I was like, oh, yeah, that guy. He's been gone for 2 years. And he's coming back, and he caught like 45, 50 passes his last season in 2015. I see he caught 58 this year, about 10 yards per reception. And I'm looking through the numbers here, and I'm trying to think when I watched Utah play this year. Saw the UCLA game, saw a little bit of, for some reason, I think they relegated you to the Pac-12 network against USC.
Yeah, they did.
And so I was beside myself there.
Bypassed us for that. Yeah.
Other than that, yeah, I saw bits and pieces of other games. So anyway, I probably saw a total of 3 to 4 games. And are we looking at an offensive attack that we've grown accustomed to with Utah? When you mention efficiency, that's a great word, and that should be the focus or the goal of most offenses, but it's kind of a word that that steers clear and makes people think, well, the offense isn't that dynamic. If their goal is to be efficient, is there more explosiveness to this offense, or is it a typical Utah offense where maybe that's the missing element on the perimeter?
No, there's some explosiveness to it for sure. Is it? I don't even know if I can dare say Oregon anymore because Oregon's came back to the pack offensively. But
Oklahoma,
yeah. So the Oklahomas of the world, no, it's not. But they had plenty of playmakers. Obviously, Covey. If you see Covey, on the sidewalk, just walking down the street, you'd think he's just some dude. I mean, he's like a 5'9", just average looking Joe. But then once he gets on the football field, he makes dudes look stupid. He's elusive. He's hard to catch. He's at the top of almost every scouting report for any opponent, at least in terms of their passing game. They also have a couple of really young wide receivers. Solomon Enos, he's a true freshman out of Arizona. He had offers from almost everywhere around the country. He's made some huge plays this year. He's still figuring it out. Jason Shelley's high school teammate is also on the outside, Jalen Dixon. His average yards per catch is like 25 yards per catch. That dude is behind defenses all day long. And the tight end game has actually become very deadly for the Utes. Utah has 3 tight ends that they've targeted heavily over the season. You mentioned the UCLA game. Covey actually has a few touchdown passes because Utah likes to get a little creative. So they caught Covey coming around, and he threw a touchdown pass. And one of Utah's tight ends, Randy Moss, one of UCLA's defensive backs, just took it right off the top of his head. Very impressive athletic play for a freshman tight end. So there's some explosiveness to this offense for sure. In some games, they've actually kind of counted on it at times. Namely against like Oregon. They had to strike some really big plays to come back against Oregon after surrendering a lead in that game. They gashed USC up and down the field. They had 550 yards or something against USC. And that's an interesting thing, about Utah's offense and just their scoring differential in division games. They blew out almost everybody in the division, minus the one game against Arizona State. Utah's really figured something out on offense. There's no doubt about it. They still need a couple more guys on the outside for sure, but they've got some dudes there. Names that you might not be familiar with, but a lot of them are freshmen, a lot of them are sophomores. I think there's probably really 2 juniors on the team that are worth note, but everybody else is young. So it's going to take some time for those to become household names. Utah's not going to drop 60 on you, but they'll be pushing 40 a lot of weeks.
And we see it so many times, Shane, in these rematch games, is that the second edition turns out to be just a completely different game than the first edition. You would think, okay, same teams, they go out there, and the first team was 2 touchdowns better the first time, and they're going to be 2 touchdowns better the second time. Well, we learned that from watching college football week to week, that these, that if a team's like Utah 9-3, sure, we know that they're a good team and they're generally going to be competitive and win games, but still a different team shows up, and that's dependent on matchups as well. And especially in this case, if you're looking at no Moss this time, but you're also looking at an offense that's developed and turned out to be a better edition of what it was early in the season, in a 21-7 loss against Washington. So obviously you got to figure some things out offensively that you didn't the first time against what's probably arguably the best defense in the Pac-12.
Yeah, well, Utah and Washington are almost identical. Utah and Washington are ranked number 1 and number 2 in the Pac-12 in defense in every statistical category. Even spectators watching this game will probably walk away with bruises and a torn ACL and a concussion. I mean, it's going to be nasty. It's going to be bruising, but the 2 teams are so similar to one another, and they've actually said that throughout this entire week. And actually, I would say for most of the season, Utah was actually probably the better team than Washington. Obviously, Washington got us up here at Rice-Eccles, but Utah was still figuring stuff out. There was some serious issues going on offensively for Utah at that time. But once the Utes got that figured out, they rolled, and they've won 7 of 8 games after that Washington State game. So yeah, they've been rolling, and they've been playing extremely well. Obviously, the game plan against Washington is going to be very unique because I believe they said at the press conference on Monday that this is the first time that Utah is going to have a rematch with an opponent since like the 40s. So everybody's very curious of what kind of game plan is Kyle Whittingham going to have for the Huskies. How are they going to attack them differently than they attacked them in the first game? There's a lot of unknowns. Kyle Whittingham has such a sterling bowl record at 11-1 as a head coach. That can he kind of factor this kind of like a bowl game? Not really, because it's not the extended wait. But I would expect Utah's defense to come out with their hair on fire. First and foremost, trying to shut down Myles Gaskin. That dude's a stud. Let Jake Browning. If Jake Browning beats him, you just salute and say, good luck. Because they got to Browning like crazy in the first matchup. He threw an interception to a defensive lineman. He was just all over the field. So, yeah, offensively is the key. If Utah can generate the points, which I think they can, but it's going to be an uphill battle. But that's going to be the key. Can they establish the line of scrimmage? Can they run the ball? If they run the ball, I think they'll be in good shape.
Got Shane Roberts on the line from the Block U. It's the SB Nation platform for Utah football. And one last thing here, Shane. I'm guessing, because this is the mentality of sports fans and the mentality of people that have a certain group of members of anything, and then there's an outsider that comes in, and even 5 years down the road, well, they're still kind of the outsider. So for the Pac-12, that's Utah and it's Colorado. So there has to be some semblance of some degree of satisfaction in breaking in as a non-Power 5 and then showing that you belong. Now, obviously, you showed you belong quite a long time ago after like the first season or two, but to win the championship would have to mean something maybe even more significant than for a lot of teams.
Yeah, well, it'd be huge. I don't think that goes without saying. Obviously, the goal this season, the entire time, was to win the Pac-12 South, because I don't know how many Utah fans, if you had a drinking game for every time a commentator said Utah was the only team not to win the South, we'd all be dead. So to get the monkey off the back for that is huge. But I think winning, there's 2 conference championships out there that I think are extremely special, and for one reason alone, and I'll tell you why. It's the Pac-12 championship, it's the Big Ten championship, because at the end of the day, what's the reward? It's the Rose Bowl. Very few people can say you've been to the Rose Bowl, you've won the Rose Bowl. And for a quote-unquote outsider like Utah to get invited to the Pac-12 and to have an opportunity to win the conference and play in a Rose Bowl, obviously we'd love to be in the conversation for college football playoff, national championship. That's all well and good. But if you're not in that conversation, you want to be in the conversation for the Rose Bowl. The granddaddy of them all, January 1st, San Gabriel's, the whole 9 yards. And that's really since about the middle part of the season, when things started to formulate and to come into focus a little bit, said, Utah might win this division. Everybody started saying, we just need a chance in one game to go to the Rose Bowl. So it's been Rose Bowl or bust for the last 3 or 4 weeks. That's as you say that around this community, everybody lights up, everybody gets super excited, everybody's thinking plane tickets, hotel, the whole 9 yards. So if Utah can find their way to win the Pac-12 championship, go to the Rose Bowl, you'll see the whole, well, at least the Salt Lake Valley, almost elevate, because everybody will be out of their heads excited to be able to represent the Pac-12 and go to that conference, to go to the Rose Bowl and play either Michigan or probably Michigan or Ohio State. I don't see Northwestern ending up there one way or the other. So that would be that's a dream scenario for the Utes outside of playing for a national title.
Jim Harbaugh's first game at Michigan, Shane, of course, knows. We will remind people out there, if you don't know, that Jim Harbaugh's first game in 2015 at Utah, like a 7-point loss, if I remember correctly.
Yep. And that was actually a gifted last touchdown, too. It was actually fairly pretty decent, pretty comfortable game for the last half of the game. They rallied to get it within that last score.
All right. Always a good discussion with Shane Roberts from the Block U, Utah's platform on SB Nation, as they get set for their showdown with Washington for the Pacific 12 championship. Shane, I made contact with you on email. I will get back to you on that, but I appreciate you stopping by.
Not a problem. Thanks, Mark. Anytime.
Shane Roberts, Block U. So join him right there for the best in Utah football coverage. And I will hang around for a few more minutes if anybody wants to call in, 860-325-3687. Any analysis you're going to get out of me, I might as well get off the line and pump out some more videos. I've knocked out the Big Ten championship game. You can catch that on SG1 Sports. I'm also going to deliver the Pac-12 championship game prediction over on SG1 Sports, but my aim is to deliver all the Power 5 championship previews right here at Mark Rogers TV. So if you caught the editions over there on SG1 Sports, I'm going to produce new, fresh versions of all the Power 5 championship game previews right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. And for the likes of, let's see, Beast out there, UAB fan, Conference USA championship game coming up this week. I hope to get to the group of 5, but you got to realize that it takes me a lot more dedication and research to cover those group of 5 championship games because it's not up here. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
What's up, Marcus? Big Poppy.
Hey, Big Poppy. How are you?
Good. So I just wanted to ask you a question about UCF, how they can get in, because now they're at number 8, and I want to run this scenario by you. Okay. So they're number 8 right now. Who's number 7? I forgot who number 7 is.
Michigan.
Michigan, Ohio State, then Oklahoma. So here's the scenario, and then I'm gonna ask you if UCF gets in. So Alabama beats Georgia. Georgia's number 4, so Georgia should be eliminated. Clemson destroys Pitt, like we all expect. So Clemson's in. Then Notre Dame still stays at number 3. And then number 4, nobody's there because Georgia just got beat by Alabama. And then Texas beats Oklahoma. And Northwestern manages to somehow pull up an upset against Ohio State.
Sure.
So then there's Michigan, UCF. Who gets in? Oh, and UCF beats Memphis.
All right. So I've got a couple questions before I can answer this question. First one is, give me the score of the SEC championship game.
I'll say 35-24.
Okay. Also, let's consider that what is Ohio State's record going to be after they lose the Big Ten championship game? I'll fill it in. I'll fill it in for you. They'll be 11-2, and Michigan is 10-2, and Ohio State annihilated them head to head. Why is Michigan considered and not Ohio State?
I don't know. Why should they?
I don't know. I'm asking you because this is your scenario.
But if this happens, if Michigan gets over UCF, it's going to be a huge. So it's going to be a change is going to have to be made, and college football, the committee is going to be severely under fire because there's no way Michigan should make it in over UCF, and no team that's behind UCF should make it in over UCF if this scenario plays out. Because Michigan, they lost to Notre Dame and they lost to Ohio State. I don't want to make the LSU argument. Well, you really can't make the argument that like how they have for LSU at the beginning of the season because other than who has Michigan actually beat down other than Penn State?
Their best wins are Penn State, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Michigan State.
So the committee goes by the ranking that the team was when that team beat them. So Penn State was around like number 9, I believe.
Well, wait a minute. The committee doesn't do either one. They're not locked in on any rules. They don't have to say, well, Wisconsin was number 5 in the country way back in September, so we've got to consider them number 5 in the country. No, they can take it all into context, and they can say, well, Wisconsin, we thought they were really good then, but they turned out to be a 7-5 team, and they're not really that good. No, they don't they don't have to put blinders on and forget that the rest of the season happened and consider that team, oh, they were number 3 then, or they were number 17 or whatever they were. No, they take it all into consideration.
So that top 5, so their top 5 and top 10 wins won't really go into accountability. Only the most recent ones.
Well, no. It depends who it is. You give me the situation. Yes, Ohio State beat TCU. TCU was like number 11 or 12 in the country. Well, they didn't turn out to be that good. They were 6-6. So now in the
I get it. Like FSU and Alabama last year. Nobody thought FSU would be that bad.
I was going there. That was going to be my next play. That provided a little controversy because the thought was, okay, well, FSU was a preseason number 3. They did absolutely nothing to justify that number 3, but they lost DeAndre Francois before they went 6-6. So how good would they have been? How good was the team that Alabama faced, because they had to face Francois at quarterback? So I could see both arguments. I played it somewhere in the middle. I wasn't saying, well, Florida State was the number 3 team in the country when Alabama played them. Well, that's ridiculous. They lost 6 games, and no team that's truly a number 3 team in the country should plummet to 6-6 just because they lost their starting quarterback. Teams lose their starting quarterbacks all over the place. And if they're really good teams, they don't plummet to 6-6. But at the same time, we understand, okay, they wouldn't have been 6-6, nor were they a 6-6 team with DeAndre Francois. So you have to put everything into context and evaluate it as fairly as possible.
Okay. So now it's to Oklahoma. So Oklahoma loses to Texas. We know it's probably going to be a close, high-scoring game. It's probably going to be like 72 to like 60. No, I'm just playing. It'll probably be something like 54 to like 48. Texas beats Oklahoma if this is to happen.
Yep.
I don't think Texas will be able to beat Oklahoma twice. I just can't see them putting up that many points. Well, I don't know, because you never know how many points the Big 12 can go to, so I can't see that happening.
Well, Big Papi, you better be able to see it, because this is your scenario. Otherwise, what are we talking about here?
Exactly. So Texas beats Oklahoma 54 to 48.
Okay.
So that should eliminate Oklahoma.
Yeah, I'm not that concerned with that score. The score I want to hear is the Georgia-Alabama score. That's the key score.
42 to 34.
42-34. If Georgia only loses to Alabama by 1 score, and Alabama, we know, is considered by the College Football Playoff Committee to be so much better than everybody else, Georgia is going to maintain a position over Central Florida and make the College Football Playoff.
Yeah, Mark.
I'm not making the selection. I'm telling you what's going to happen. I'm not telling you what I would do. I'm telling you what they're going to do.
I don't think I could see them doing that, because there'll be a 2-loss team that got beat down by LSU.
Yeah.
So basically, they would stay at number 4, and then, wow, you know what? I wouldn't be surprised if that happens.
Don't be surprised.
And then if that happens, UCF fans are going to be going down to wherever they make the selection show with pitchforks and torches, because UCF deserves some respect, man. And something has to be said. And did you watch the video I said a few weeks ago about Joe Klatt absolutely destroying UCF?
I did.
And I was just so disgusted, because like what you told me several occasions, you might as well just go down to UCF, Joe Klatt, and the College Football Committee, and tell them, hey, thanks for coming out for summer practice. Thanks for getting ready to compete this season. But you're not going to make it to the college football playoffs no matter what you did.
Yeah.
And then Notre Dame fans, like, they disgust me the most, because Notre Dame has about a win versus Michigan. They played Stanford, but Stanford wasn't as good as everybody thought they would be. And then they almost lost to USC, almost lost to Vanderbilt, and barely beat Pitt, a team that UCF beat by 30 points.
The problem, Big Papi, The problem with all those statements you just made is that there were a lot of almost and barelys in all those statements. There had to be they did lose to Team X, but that never happened.
Notre Dame fans, man, I can't. If Notre Dame makes it to the playoffs, I really can't wait for them to get destroyed because everybody that I watched today, Joe Klatt said that earlier that everybody expects Notre Dame to lose by like more than 3 points to any team that they will play in the college football playoffs.
Yeah, I expect them to lose off the top of my head. Yes.
I mean, but dang, Mark, I love your takes. You always spit out the real, and that really would happen. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened if UCF didn't get in because Georgia barely lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game.
So, Big Poppy, also take this into consideration. The committee said, even going back to the first year, that if there are substantial injuries, that they will take those into account. And UCF has obviously lost one of the best quarterbacks in the country. So they would make that excuse as well.
But the thing about it is UCF is still good even without Mackenzie Miller. Well, they're not as good. They're not. I still see your point. That's crazy. That is really crazy.
I think it's horrible that there's a team out there that's won 3 consecutive games or 24 consecutive games.
Like 26.
Whatever we're at now. Yeah, they went 13-0 and now they're 12-0. Whatever it's been. And they still cannot and they again, I think this is such poetic justice that they went out there in the Peach Bowl last year and beat the team that beat the 2 teams that played in the national championship game, and they did so on the same field. That I just thought was poetic justice, and I don't know what else these guys need to do, but there should be a spot for them. I don't think they're one of the 4 best teams in the country, so I don't want people to misinterpret what I'm saying. There's a difference for me between earning a spot and being one of the 4 best teams. I don't think they're one of the 4 best teams, but my point is that it shouldn't matter what I think. That shouldn't matter. What matters is who earned the position.
So I got another question. So how did Boise State was as good as, well, they might not have been, but they were pretty doggone good. So how did they get to the point of being Colin Kaepernick upset away from making it to the BCS National Championship?
Let's see, what year was that? That would have been about 2009. I'm trying to think what year that was.
Like how they got to the point.
Well, they also, so the one thing that UCF, excuse me, has not done, and it's partially their fault, but they never expected to be in this position, but they haven't scheduled a big non-conference game. I know that they played Pitt, but Pitt's not that good. I know they're playing in a conference championship game, but they're going to be 7-6. So they played Pitt and they annihilated Pitt. So what would be great for your scenario would be as if Pitt won the ACC championship game and then UCF could say, we beat them by 30 some points and they just beat Clemson. But the thing that Boise State would do every year, Big Poppy, is they would play one of the top teams in the country non-conference. During those years, they played, one year they beat Virginia Tech when they were really good. One year they beat Georgia in the non-conference. A couple of times they played Oregon non-conference. They would always play somebody non-conference that was really good. And they usually beat them.
So basically, it's just UCF scheduling. So next year, I don't even think they would be as good as they are right now. They're having Mackenzie Milton back, but I just think this is the best. Well, I don't know. They still have they have a lot of young players on offense and defense. So I don't know. But next year, if they go undefeated this year, which I strongly think so, I hope they play Florida so Florida fans can stop getting on my case about Miami this and Miami that and Miami being overrated. So I hope UCF plays Florida, or I hope Georgia find some way to absolutely obliterate Alabama, and hopefully that's able to knock Alabama out of the playoff discussion. But we all know that's not going to happen, because I would love to see Alabama versus UCF in a bowl game. That would mean something. I wouldn't even be concerned about Alabama players not going for real, because me and you both know Alabama is going to want to have a chance to prove that UCF isn't all that good, and I think everybody will come on their head again. So I wouldn't even be worried about all that. I would really love to see that. But who do you think UCF will probably be matched up against? Because I think they'll beat Memphis, even without Mackenzie Milton.
So they'll go to a New Year's Six game, and you can certainly Google all sorts of bowl projections from people that actually spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours trying to figure that out, versus me, who's just pulling names off the top of my head. But since you get a little bit of trust in me, UCF in a New Year's Six game could play. They could play Michigan. They could play Florida. They could play Texas if Texas wins the Big 12. Those are the most likely candidates.
Washington in the Rose Bowl?
The Rose Bowl is going to want to stay with a Pac-12 Big 12 matchup, or a Big 10 matchup. I'm sorry. Yeah, they would love to have Ohio State and Washington State play, or Ohio State in the winter. The Ohio State and Washington would probably be their most prominent matchup that the Rose Bowl would love to have. And whomever is calling me, Big Poppy will wrap it up here in just a second, just so call back. But that would be the Rose Bowl's preference.
Okay. Well, all right, Mark, it was a pleasure. I had a good time of hearing your explanation about my question. I was just wondering, it has been on my mind for so long, and thanks for answering that for me.
Absolutely, Big Poppy. You have a great night.
You too.
All right, thank you. Our guy, Big Poppy. So whoever was calling, I'll take another call or so. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Later tonight, we will have some Clemson talk with Ryan Cantor from Shaking the Southland, the SB Nation platform for Clemson football. And also, most likely, Chris Fetters, who writes for Dogman. That's the rival site for Washington football as the Huskies take on Utah. And, of course, this is Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who do we have on the line?
What's up, Mark? It's DeAndre. How you doing?
Hey, DeAndre. How are you?
Good. What'd you think about Temple, Carolina hiring Matt Brown back?
Oh, North Carolina?
Yeah, UNC. About them hiring Matt Brown.
I can't say that I gave it a whole lot of thought, but my first thought for a football program like that is myself, I'm looking for the 40-something guy that's the up-and-comer that has a lot of new ideas and a lot of energy and really is that next guy, that next Matt Campbell, Iowa State, Tom Herman, Texas, that guy. That's the guy I'm looking for. I'm not looking for Mac Brown myself.
Yeah. And I was listening to a couple of talk shows, and they said it's really not the head coach. They said it's he's more of a figurehead, and he was hiring Chris Kingsbury was supposed to come, but they said Kingsbury might be looking at the NFL job since he got fired from Texas Tech. And what's my boy that used to coach at Auburn? What's his name? He was defensive coordinator for a little bit, and now he's the analyst because him and Fedora couldn't get along.
Gene Chizik.
So yeah, they said that he was going to be the come back under Matt Brown as defensive coordinator, but we'll see. But back into more important things, like Clemson making the Final Four, or whatever we call it, the national championship, or whatever's going on. I don't think it's fair that Notre Dame is going to have 5 weeks to prepare for whoever they play, if it's Clemson, Alabama, or Oklahoma, or whoever they play. I don't think it's fair that they get 5 weeks to prepare. I think it was fair that Alabama got 5 weeks to prepare last week. I wish there was that conference championship was the outlier instead of most deserving. I don't like that because I don't think it's fair that Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia all have to play a championship game, and Notre Dame doesn't.
I totally agree.
Yeah, and also, this is one of those years. I wish they say if Oklahoma and Ohio State win, let's have a play-in game, and that's something I could go for.
Wait a minute,
I know
DeAndre. Hang on just a second here. Hang on just a second here. You are wanting Notre Dame or anybody not to have the advantage of having the extra week, but then you'd be forcing Ohio State and Oklahoma to play an extra game, and the winner of that game would have one less week of rest.
Right. Well, the only reason why I say that, when you want to know who was better between those two, I mean, I'm sorry. I know Ohio State. I don't have a lot of respect for the Big Ten. You know that. But Ohio State.
And I still like you, DeAndre.
Yes, I know. But, I mean, if Northwestern wins the Big Ten championship, I won't say this is the Big Ten champion, by the way, because it did beat them just out of fun. Yeah, but, yeah, I just think those teams are so close. How do you decide who's better? I mean, everybody keeps saying, Oklahoma plays in this conference where they don't play no defense. But Ohio State gives up 52 points to Maryland. I mean, how's that great defense I Purdue? I think TCU scored, 28 on?
How many?
It's not like they're playing.
DeAndre, how many points did South Carolina score against Clemson?
Hey, but let me ask you a question, Mark. Honestly, at the beginning of the year, I know you probably don't remember this. Didn't I say that South Carolina and Duke was going to give Clemson a hard time? I mean, I don't know if you can remember back that far.
I don't remember everything.
I mean, yeah, because, I mean, I have been hearing this. I even heard this Pete point this out and a couple other teams. South Carolina has a top, 38 offense? And look at Michigan's defense. They haven't played anybody with a higher than a 60 rating in offense this year so far. So, I mean, it's all, I mean, we all knew that South Carolina could throw the ball. I actually picked South Carolina to beat Georgia. I think South Carolina had a bad record like they did this year.
You know I'm gonna check your numbers here, DeAndre. You're telling me that Michigan did not play a top 60 offense this year.
I'm just saying. I would listen to a couple talk shows. Pigskin Pete called it out. I can't remember. It's Trevor, whatever the guy name is on Nebraska. He's out of Nebraska. I believe he played linebacker. He said it too.
Trevor Maddich.
Play a top. Didn't play a top 60 offense. I guess
he played at BYU, by the way.
BYU. Okay.
Penn State's at 44.
Okay.
So they played a number 44 offense. Wisconsin's 38.
Okay. So I'll tell Pigskin Pete next time I talk to him, he was wrong.
I knew that Penn State and Wisconsin were higher than 60.
Right. But my point is, I just feel like I'm coming to more of your side. I think this committee, I think there needs to be some revamping. But you got too many teams that are so close. I'm tired of Central Florida. How can you go 12 and I guess they won like 25 games straight or something like that?
Yeah.
How can you go that far and not get considered? Let's put them on the field against somebody and let's see what they can do. Hey, they always playing these season games openers. Let's let them play against Alabama or somebody scheduled play in one of these opening games and let's see what this squad can do. I'm sorry the quarterback got hurt, but they're saying that they're real talented. I would like to see what they could do on these fields in an open season game, not a bowl game where the players from the other team ain't trying to get hurt or, they're doing the least they can possibly do to stay on the field in a meaningless bowl game. So I don't know that didn't happen. But like I said, I mean, South Carolina. I'm sorry for jumping around, but South Carolina, I called that earlier. I thought Clemson was going to have some trouble with them, and for the last 2 years, Clemson just fashion. I mean, Debo Sanders, he's a monster. I mean, I thought I remember him running back 2 kids against NC State 2 years ago.
Yep.
Yeah, and the other guy, they said that Clemson wanted him real bad. The other receiver, I think it's Edwards.
Yeah, Brian Edwards.
Clemson wanted his. Yeah, and they said that he's going to be going the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft because of his height and size. So, I mean, South Carolina wasn't no pushover, and they threw the ball though. They had some nice alignments, but also I think I made this point earlier. This whole month off when Clemson got to beat Pitt first, but after they play Pitt and they're lucky enough to beat Pitt, they're gonna have to self-scout, and that's one of the things that we all talked about in the beginning of the season. How good is Clemson's secondary? That was their obvious weakness. And Venables, we all see Dabo fussing them out on the sideline. Like, why are you blitzing so much? Sometimes it's better to play coverage than let them throw the ball all over the field like that on. So we're going to see what happens. I mean, a lot of people got exposed. I mean, hey, that poor corner from Michigan, I still feel sorry for him because they were lighting him up. Ohio State was. So you know.
Well, Clemson secondary is not going to get exposed this Saturday. This is not the team to do it.
Pitt has a way to beat the number two team, and we're gonna find out. I mean, I was telling somebody, I think a couple of Miami fans got mad at me because I said Pitt won't take this game seriously because they know they're praying for a bigger prize the next week. I don't think Pitt even game playing for Miami, and they got mad at me, and I was like, but one of the Miami fans told me that Miami's defense was better than Clemson, and Miami ain't give up 35 points all year. But I said they played 4 teams in common, and Boston College didn't score an offensive touchdown.
Okay. Yep.
No, Duke didn't score an offensive touchdown, and Georgia Tech scored 21 on Clemson, but scored 27 or 28 on Miami. And I can't remember the other team that they played in common. Florida State.
Florida State.
I think scored 10.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, scored 10.
Well, that game was 28-27. Yeah.
Right. I don't think there's a big Miami's linebacking core is pretty good, but
sure.
I don't think there is a big comparison between Clemson. I think Miami defensive line was kind of weak. But like I said, back to what I was saying, South Carolina is not as bad as people think they were. I was shocked that Georgia blew them out, but that early interception really got them. And South Carolina, I mean, their defensive players were just dropping like flies, like somebody put poison in their food or something. I just don't know what happened in that game. They would get hurt so much. And unfortunately, that happened, but I'm glad Clemson got the win. I would like to see a more healthy South Carolina team play Clemson, but it is what it is. And I think Bentley last year is next year. So they're going to have to develop another quarterback. They had their chance. And Trevor Lawrence got at least another 3 years, two or 3 years. So I don't know if they're going to be beating Clemson anytime soon, but we'll see. But I can't wait to see this matchup. I'm hearing that Alabama, if they beat Georgia, is going to ask to go to the Orange Bowl instead of the Cotton Bowl. So I would like to see how that's going to turn out because they said they play Oklahoma. That's too close to Oklahoma's campus. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the background. I mean, behind the scenes.
Wait a minute. Somebody's saying that Oklahoma shouldn't go to the Cotton Bowl because they're too close to campus?
Right.
Okay. I understand that that's a very slight advantage, but if anybody knows about the distance between Norman, Oklahoma and Dallas, Texas, it's got to be 10 hours. It's not close.
Wow, for real?
I'm guesstimating. It might be 8 or 7, but it's not close. And number two is there are bowl games that are there's all sorts of USC and UCLA make a home playing in the Rose Bowl, and play in the Rose Bowl game and have a huge advantage against teams coming from Wisconsin and Ohio and Pennsylvania to play in the Rose Bowl. And I could go on and on and on. LSU played a national championship game twice in the Superdome in New Orleans. So, you know, Miami played the Orange Bowl against Wisconsin in Miami last year.
Right.
We could go on and on about teams that get to play bowl games pretty much on campus practically. Florida, you know, half of the SEC gets to play the Gator Bowl, the Outback Bowl, the Citrus Bowl. Anytime Florida makes it, they're playing close to home, which is common.
And the Peach Bowls, Georgia.
Sure.
Georgia Tech, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
they've played in the Peach Bowl many times. Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
But Mark, man, it's always great listening to your show. I'm going here. I got off my first job, so I'm about to hit the second one.
Oh, boy.
I just want to give you a quick call. And, yeah, man, Christmas time, you know how them kids are. They always in your pocket during Christmas time. So I'll go out here and make this money, man.
That's it. You got to stay ahead of them.
I appreciate the show. I'll be listening while it keeps me awake and listen to the great debates you have on there. Joe Clyde and them, we all need to make a petition on your channel to get you on that committee. Maybe we can get some sense out of it.
That would be tremendous.
Yes, sir. But you have a great night, Mark.
Thank you so much, DeAndre. I appreciate it.
All right.
Bye-bye. That's my man, DeAndre, getting the job done. So, all right, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. We've got Clemson talking Washington coming later tonight. I'll get those videos posted out. Well, that will not be a live stream. There's no reason to go live. We've dwindled it down to about 20 viewers. So I know you guys are holding down the live chat, doing a great job. I appreciate it. I am going to get to all the Power 5 championship games, previews, predictions, betting lines, everything going on concerning college football and championship week. Of course, I will be around most of the day, if not the entire day on Saturday, with instant analysis of the championship games, and also Friday night with the Pac-12 on the field, as well as the MAC. I intend on watching every conference championship game. And of course, Sunday's the big day with Selection Sunday. I appreciate you guys. If I missed anything in the live chat that you guys wanted to convey directly to me, whether that's a comment, a suggestion, a question, anything, just send it to any of the videos. Just pick out a video, click on the video, and just go to the comment section and write it, because a couple times a day or every other day, every so often, I pull up the comments regardless of the video, just all the comments, and I try to respond to as many as possible. I apologize if I'm not responding to yours. Fortunately, we've had a huge increase in comments. Therefore, I can only respond to so many. So I try to scan them. And if I see that one of you has commented 7 or 8 times, I'll select one and get back to you. Or if I see somebody that's a first timer here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, I'll respond to them as well. So thanks so much for your support. I appreciate it. And enjoy the football this weekend. But before that, you will hear from us many, many times. Ohio State talk, Alabama, Clemson, Washington, Utah, Pitt, Texas, Oklahoma. We'll cover everyone right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. And I am going to check the live chat before I drop off the line. Navy's holding down the live chat like that. Dennis in there as well. Mike, Terry Ann, I think you've left. It's good to see you, as well as, Richard Neal, Superman 1100. Any predictions on this weekend's championship games? Yes, they're coming. They are coming. All right. So I think somebody's calling me there. Is that I can't make out your handle there, but somebody's calling me on the distance between Norman and Dallas, I think, with the 3 hours. I think that's what that's responding to. I was just making the point that there are much closer venues for bowl games and schools playing, like USC and UCLA in the Rose Bowl, like Miami in the Orange Bowl, like LSU in the Sugar Bowl, that play right there. So I would have never guessed Norman and Dallas were that close. I guess I'm thinking way far out west where everything's like 10 hours apart. Let's look at this real quick. Norman, Oklahoma, Dallas, Texas, distance. There you go. 3 hours, 255, 191 miles. I apologize, DeAndre. But my point being that there are teams that have much closer trips to play in bowl games, and that's not negating them being selected from a bowl game just because they're close. All right, everyone, we appreciate it. We'll be back very soon, so keep those notifications working, and we'll see you soon here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.